Good morning. I'm very excited to be here. I'm not sure what time zone I'm in my head, but I appreciate being here. Thank you to the faculty of social sciences here for inviting me, to Wellbeing for making it happen, and to the staff who've been amazing in terms of coordinating our visit. It really means a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about a project that I have not presented yet. So this is my first shot at it. I've been working on a project for the last 5 to 6 years, gathering longitudinal data on student well-being, in particular in educational mobility and inequality. And there are certain themes in this talk that are going to overlap with the plenary discussion of absolute and relative comparisons. And I especially love the cover of this. I have been an inequality scholar who's looked at well-being of populations relative to the positions that people are in, but increasingly I've become interested in movement within the stratification system and whether it has consequences. We know that downward movement obviously has relative and absolute consequences, but I've become interested in educational mobility in particular and the experiences of first-generation college students, that is, college students who neither parent has a bachelor's degree, so they're the first ones to go to college, and whether or not there are costs to that upward mobility that they experience. This project started as I mentioned, 5 or 6 years ago, when an undergraduate student of mine who was first generation, I had in a class and I asked, how's it going? Like, you're here, you've made it to college. And this undergraduate gave me a sort of a strange answer to the question. I thought they were going to be really optimistic about it, but the response was, like, I'm here in Columbus. I'm from here in Columbus, Ohio, but Ohio State being at this university is like a totally different world than where I grew up. To me, it's like being on a different planet. Even though I was born in this city, there was sort of a disconnect or a sense of isolation or alienation that this particular student was going through. And this shouldn't have caught me off guard. If you read the education and stratification literature, or you'll find out relatively quickly that first-generation students are less likely, obviously, to go to college. They're also more likely to drop out. In particular, we know about these lingering outcome inequalities for first-generation students, despite increasing enrollments, et cetera. There's sort of a narrative in American culture that there are so many universities now, that there's all this upward mobility going on, and that, why care about first-generation students, when in fact, if you look at large data sources like the General Social Survey, you find out that things haven't actually changed much in about 40 years. So I'll show you this little sort of graphic here. Not first-generation students are the black line on the bottom, and continuing generation students are the dashed line at the top. That is, since the 1970s, we have not seen an increase in first-generation students actually going and or completing college. That is, the inequality is relatively persistent and pervasive. That actually surprised me. I thought there would be more upward movement, especially of that bottom line in particular. So what's going on? I thought, especially after that conversation with that student, I wanted to know what was going on during those college years. I was a first-generation college student myself, so I had some speculation about sort of difficulties that first-generation students have in this process of potential upward mobility in particular. So I decided to sort of design this project. I knew I needed unique data to the field in particular. I wanted to see if I could capture students when they entered college, and I wanted to follow them through their entirety of their undergrad years to see what was going on in particular. So that's pretty much what I did. And you're the first to hear all about it. So hopefully you like it. So we were able to survey 3,000 first-year students coming into a large Midwestern university. You might know what that university is based on the people I'm sitting next to on my name tag. About 936 responded to a relatively substantial survey. We asked them everything about their background. We oversampled here consciously first-generation students. So it was essentially like a 50-50 sample, but we also have a sample weight that we used in the analyses that inflated this sample to the actual whole freshman population of incoming students at Ohio State. We also did in-depth interviews with 66 first-generation students and 10 continuing generation students for comparison. And maybe more importantly, we've been following these same students over the entirety of their undergraduate careers. That is, we surveyed them and did in-depth interviews with the same 76 students across 4 years, fall of 2018, 19, 20, and 21. And then along with these data, the qualitative interview data and the survey data, we also got permission to append to these data official university records and transcripts relative to their GPAs, whether they graduated college eventually by their 4th year, by their 5th year, et cetera. Actually, it was last week. I kid you not, last week they I said, I went to somebody in the registrar's office, can you append the most recent data? We want to know who graduated or didn't graduate in particular. We also looked at college majors, et cetera. Okay, so the key questions we can ask with this data is how and when do first generation challenges begin? What are the key barriers and stressors they experience? And what are the implications? We started off with this question, what are the implications for academic performance and completion? But there's a narrative that begins to emerge, especially out of the qualitative data, about stress and overall well-being. It's not just about their educational well-being, but it's also about social psychological well-being in particular. And you're going to see some themes having to do with absolute versus relative comparisons, especially in the qualitative data. Okay, so now originally, we're collecting the survey data, we're appending it with registrar records about whether the student is still there, how are they doing academically, and by the 3rd year, we already saw the maybe expected gap occur. So this is based on some regressions with a lot of control variables. We see by the beginning of year 3, we see this is essentially dropout rates or sort of persistence at our institution. In particular, we see the gap growing in relatively expected ways. But remember, in the middle of this and gathering these surveys, we were also interviewing first generation students in particular. So I'm going to share with you a little bit very quickly some of the qualitative material that really gave us insight into what the key stressors were and how they were unfolding in the lives of these students that might have implications for the gap in graduation that I'm showing you here. So the 3 major barriers or stressors end up emerging out of the qualitative data. One, isolation or limited integration or lack of social support, et cetera, right? We know as social scientists that isolation, lack of integration can have really pretty significant consequences for well-being, social psychological well-being, et cetera. This is true among first generation students on the campus in particular. They get there, it's an alien world, as that first quote suggested, but this person essentially saying, I can't really turn to my parents, share what I was experiencing, struggles I was facing. I found it difficult to talk to them and approach them for help and advice, but they also could not find connections on campus, either among their fellow students or among faculty in particular. No, I wouldn't say I belong. I mean, some days I hate it, some days I love it, but I know I still feel that I don't really belong. I don't fit in to what people think, right? So lack of belonging is sort of an important issue for these students in particular. Another, I was really suffering in silence from the second I walked onto campus, like March or something, I think. I felt no one could help me, like things no one would just be able to understand and all of this. I just didn't know at time who I would go to. I hadn't developed any relationships that I thought were trustworthy to help me figure things out. So this is a very common narrative among first generation students. Number one, they don't have the cultural capital. Their parents were not college attenders, so they can't go to their parents, but they also feel like outliers on their campuses in particular. Even though they're sharing dorm rooms with peers that are, from more advantaged backgrounds, they tend to be quite reluctant about sharing their background with even their dorm mates in particular. A second emergent theme that happens is what I call hitting an academic brick wall. Now, speaking about like structural policies, et cetera, for those of you who don't know, the United States high school education system is quite unequal. That is, there's massive spending disparities across school districts in the United States. Some high schools offer advanced placement and honors classes, especially in affluent areas. Poor urban inner city areas and rural areas, on the other hand, might have no AP classes, no honors classes, et cetera. Now, Ohio State is a relatively, it's increasingly a hard institution to get into. So most of the students in our sample were the best and brightest of their high schools in particular, to be very clear. Some of them are first-generation students that I'm sharing quotes with were valedictorians of their high school. They were the #1 student in their high school. But what happens when they're funneled into classrooms with students from affluent areas is they realize all of a sudden that there was inequality in their background experiences that usually play out in these courses, courses like Chem and Calculus 1, and these filter classes in particular. And it comes as a sort of a shock to them. So I come here, I meet all these people who have already taken AP Bio, AP Chem. I was in the Chem, everybody was getting this stuff so fast because they were like, oh, I already learned all of this. I was like, what? Where did you learn this? I took Chem, but it was only high school Chem. To go on, I feel like most other students came in here like either already having lots of college courses or just like already having a better understanding of material. I don't know. I don't know if it has something to do with like public school versus private school, but like that may be the case because my school was a really good school, but it was still a public school. This has consequences for self-esteem, sense of whether they even belong in college in the first place. Again, these are the best and brightest of their schools, but they come to college and all of a sudden they hit this sort of brick wall, a realization that they might not be the smartest kid anymore. So here's 2 little quotes. I just don't think college is for me. This is a valedictorian from high school. Like I feel so dumb sometimes, like I don't need to be in college or deserve to be in college. I sometimes just feel like I'm not smart enough compared to other people. That's the relative comparison right there. And one more, I was pretty high achieving all through elementary school, middle school, high school. I was almost at the top of the class. And so I feel like it was even worse for me than a lot of people because you go from being on the top and then you're just sort of like, oh, okay, I'm not. Okay, finally, financial stresses or barriers. The price of higher education in the United States has been exponentially rising over time. Students disproportionately depending on financial aid. In particular, when I say financial aid, I'm not talking about merit scholarships here, but I'm talking about student loans, student loan debt, accumulation of student loan debt, and work study, that is working a job while you're on campus as part of your financial aid package. This kind of stress plays out almost in every one of the first-generation interviews we did. That is students worrying about the accumulation of debt over time, but also juggling one job or even multiple jobs at the same time. Unlike their peers who maybe don't have to work, who can join clubs on campus, who can go get tutoring on campus, first-generation students are often juggling work. And what gives way is they're less integrated on campus. As a consequence, they have less time to study, et cetera. So a couple more quotes. I tried to work this autumn semester, and it was like, whoa, like I barely had breaks. Like not enough time to do homework or study like you were at a library or something. Similarly, I think right now I'm working, so it's that's another 8 to 10 hours of my time that's taken off. So once I'm done with work, it's pretty much like any time I have left is for homework or studying or going to bed. And some of these students, by the way, are working multiple jobs. And my colleagues at Ohio State, probably who've taught large classes, know once in a while you'll have a student who's nodding off, but they may be working a full-time job while trying to be a full-time student at the same time. Okay, I mean, it can be hard to work in college, and then I really don't have a lot of financial support from parents or family like a lot of other students, so it's like I do everything on my own. But I have sometimes choose between if I'm going to work, if I'm going to study, that's really the last choice I honestly want to make. So there is sort of a cost-benefit analysis going on. These stressors that I'm talking about, financial, whatever the other one was, hitting the academic brick wall, and the social isolation obviously can compound one another. In particular, working a job means that you're less integrated on campus, et cetera. Okay, so my big question was, and I didn't know what the answer to this question was until last week when I had appended data, do these mechanisms of potential disadvantage, inequality, and stress, they create matter in the aggregate, especially when it comes to achievement and attainment? And the answer is yes. We were able to draw from the first and second year of the survey data. We knew how integrated they were. We knew who was working jobs, who was on financial aid. We asked questions about integration on campus. And so we went back to the original survey data of almost 1,000 students, appended it with registrar data, And we first look at sort of a couple of basic indicators. I'm still playing around with this, with integration, financial and academic stress variables. And you can see that the directionality of these go the way you would generally expect. Now, Ohio State freshmen and sophomore are generally required to live on campus. That's why these numbers, I'm afraid I'm gonna hit the wrong pointer. These numbers are relatively high because you have to essentially petition to not live on campus. And you see first generation students are more likely to petition because maybe they can't afford the dorm fees or the food card or whatever. So they petition to stay home, live with parents and commute in, et cetera. They're less likely to be involved in student organizations on campus, more likely to rely on student aid, more likely to work at a paying job and actually work more hours as well. I think the average for continuing generation students that work is about 7 hours a week. First generation students is somewhere between 20 and 22 hours a week working a job. So that's a pretty substantial difference. And then we looked at high school credits, high school college credits. Did they come in with sort of these differences in AP, et cetera? And the answer was yes. I thought that would be a little higher, but it wasn't. Perfect. And are they in the honors scholars program at the university? So Ohio State, like a lot of universities, have honors scholars programs for the quote unquote best and brightest students who live in small living communities. And one reason we included it in here is because we wanted to know whether or not our first generation students were embedded within academic communities or not. Some are, but not nearly at the same rate as continuing gen students. Okay, so this grade point average, you could see that we obviously have the negative first generation effect here, even in the face of other sort of baseline demographic controls. And then if we add in these indicators, potential mediators, what's going on. And of course, we get some effects that we expect. All the effects are going in the right direction. Some are significant, some are not significant. But these sort of three mechanisms that we really picked up on from the qualitative material, we just wanted to test it with the quantitative data, we're going the same direction. Living on campus obviously matters in a positive way. Relying on financial aid clearly causes some kind of stress, or it's related to working on campus in particular, although we didn't pick it up here, but you'll see in a second, it does show up in the sort of graduation in particular. Let me go to graduation really quickly. We modeled like whether they graduated in 4 years, whether they graduated in 5 years, and we see the gaps in expected directions here. This is predicted probabilities. Now, I'm going to tell you, this doesn't look that big. Actually, the gaps are actually about twice as big as I'm showing you here, because something that struck my mind were among the students who seem to be dropping out of school. Are they really dropping out of school, or are they maybe going to another university? So, right. So I have one of my ex-graduate students, Jasmine Whiteside, who some people here know, got a grant from the American Educational Research Association to try to track down the people that disappeared off Ohio State records. We have found 10 continuing generation and 10 first gen. Of the 10 continuing generation students that seemingly dropped out, 9 of them were at other universities. They just transferred, in some cases, to more prestigious universities. In particular, of the 10 first generation students, 1 was at a university. All the others had left college altogether and were unsure whether they were ever going to go back. So if I had to guess, I would guess the gaps here are actually about double what they are, about a 10% gap. Okay. So we throw in the demographic controls. It's sort of consistent. It eats up some of the effect. And then obviously, these actually begin to all, again, go in the same direction as key mechanisms of sort of inequality. And then if we look at 5-year graduation rates, the effects are generally similar, and we even get stronger effects down here. The effect here disappears, although I think the gap, there is actually still a gap there. It's just that we're missing people that have moved over to other universities. So sort of to conclude quickly, I wish I had more time because I have so much data here, haven't explored. Go ahead, ask me that our data was collected right in the middle of COVID. Actually, we collected 2 waves, and then COVID hit, and then we collect waves 3 and 4. So we did, believe me, our survey asked a lot of questions about what happened during COVID to you, but I don't have time to talk about it today. What I do want to talk about is upward mobility obviously happens, whether through employment or education, yet it's difficult. It's possible, it's difficult. Education, higher education is an important avenue. We know those who earn bachelor's degrees actually earn significantly more, have more stable job careers, et cetera. However, the experience of upward mobility, I would make the case here today, is fraught with barriers, obstacles, and challenges That can be material in character, right? They can't afford college, so they have to get loans, et cetera. So we know there's something material, but there are also social and interactional barriers or issues that arise, especially when individuals find themselves in unfamiliar contexts relative to their backgrounds. Although upward mobility has largely positive material consequences, it's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I want to be really clear. Even though there are barriers and struggles, you want to get that bachelor's degree. However, I think there's really an untapped area of study within the sociology of inequality, sociology of education, and maybe the life course in particular. That is the potential social psychological costs of upward climbs, in particular, such as anxiety, stress, depression, isolation, one's sense of belonging. In fact, when we were doing these interviews every year, we had counseling services cards to hand out to some of these students because some of them were very depressed, some of them were very anxious and very stressed out. This sort of resonates with at least some popular literature that's begun to emerge on upward mobility in general, and those who experience rapid upward mobility talking about living in a world of limbo, not feeling like they fit into that old world that they came from, and not quite feeling like they fit into the world that they've landed in at the same time. And this causes distress, despite the fact that it comes with material benefits. So I will stop there. How's my timing? I said 1 minute. Thank you very much.